Welcome to episode 10 of Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. We're going from the beginning and looking at what made Canada's premier superhero team work, what didn't work, and taking a romp through a lesser read but much loved corner of the 616.
Tiny bit of housekeeping to start. Everyone, I apologize for my audio quality last episode. We have no idea what happened. There was a deadline. My tux didn't come back from the cleaners. An old friend of mine came in from out of town. Someone stole my car. There was an earthquake, a terrible flood, locusts. Hopefully, this episode won't have recording gremlins again.
In honor of that great Canadian, Alanis, it's pretty damn ironic that we opened that episode apologizing for my voice when yours is the one that shit the bed. Don't you think?
I really do think. We pick up today in the aftermath of the tragic events of Alpha Flight number 12, where Jerome Jackson used a giant remote-controlled robot to beat Alpha Flight team leader Guardian nearly to death, damaging his powered suit to the point it exploded and burned Guardian to ash in front of his horrified wife, Heather. Today we'll be covering the epilogue issue, Alpha Flight number 13, and a silly guest appearance in ROM Space Knight. And, as a first, we have some listener questions at the end. Let's get to it.
Alpha Flight number 13, cover date August 1984. The cover shows Wolverine in his Canadian Western trappings. I don't know how you describe that look, but...
No, I think that's perfect. That's exactly what I would describe it as. He looks like a Western Canadian.
So it shows Wolverine, claws out, defending a cowering Heather in a graveyard, saying, "Okay, sucker, the only way to get to the lady is through me." It's fine. I mean, it's fine. It does the job of referencing a popular character to maybe draw the eye on the newsstand, but it's otherwise just fine. It's there. Although, when we get into the issue proper, there's something quite bait and switchy about it.
As was the cover to number 11 that hinted at the X-Men, but wasn't the X-Men. It's just John Byrne playing with the format as he's at, well, I wouldn't say the peak, but, you know, he's doing a good job. People are paying attention. The issue opens with a black and white full-page long shot of 8 people underneath a bleak tree in the middle distance. The foreground is a messy display of headstones and grave markers. Instead of a traditional credits listing, the creators' names are written on the foremost grave markers without indicating what aspect of the book they worked on. Since it's the same creators as always, it's a cool touch.
Our creators are Byrne, Yanchus, Higgins, O'Neill, and Shooter. Jim Shooter's grave marker here appears to be part of an 8-foot-tall stone sculpture of the Grim Reaper, which is kind of a weird thing to have in a cemetery. Like, angels, I guess, are one thing, but the Grim Reaper just staring down at you seems kind of dark.
You know what? Maybe John Byrne was a Discworld fan.
You brought that up just because you know I haven't gotten into the series yet. Damn it, I need to read those books. Okay, fine. It's also probably a joke from John Byrne about how Shooter's office is where the creative ideas go to die. Oh, Byrne, you catty bitch.
We are seeing the memorial service for Alpha Flight founder and leader James McDonald Hudson, a.k.a. Guardian, a.k.a. JMH. This and the next 11 pages are done without any dialogue whatsoever. It's like the opposite of what we had in issue number 6 with Snowbird, where there was no art. Now we get no words. It really hammers home the feeling of loss and shock that our Alphan friends are dealing with. We see an unnamed pastor of some sort leading the service in his white preaching robe, and our remaining team members are all very somber and black.
It's actually a really amazing use of color as they all form a mass, just a dark black mass with just their heads and hands standing out. The rest is their clothes against a stark white background with some dark birds flying in the distance. I mean, it really emphasizes the somber tone. It gives a sense of their unity in their grief. It also just has this really 80s comics feel to me. Also kind of, I mean, Sandman started in 89, but I think it has some, serious roots to 80s British comics. And I don't know, there's just something about the line work, the color usage that it gives it a sense of time and place in comics, art, and history, for me anyways.
What I like is that Michael Two Youngman, a.k.a. the Sarseed medicine man known as Shaman, is even wearing a suit and tie. We've only seen him dressed like this once in the very first panel of his backup story, where it was used to show how much he's changed since his youth when he rejected his grandfather's teaching, and Michael just looks so uncomfortable in a tie every time we see him. Each team member is shown giving their respects to Heather Hudson, wife of JMH, and now the person who has been involved in Alpha Flight and Department H the longest, even if she wasn't an active member of the team. Michael gives her a fatherly hug, totally in character as both the team's resident dad and because he knew Heather as the young neighbor girl in his previous life as Dr. Two Youngman before he became shaman.
He and Snowbird are also the first members of Alpha Flight outside of JMH himself. And speaking of Snowbird, aka Narya, the shape-changing demigoddess of the Northlands, she touches Heather's forehead with her fingers before flying off as a big goddamn owl, as she's wont to do. It looks as though she's administering something of a blessing to Heather, which as a demigoddess, she is absolutely qualified to do. She's also in her non-passing form. Her eyes are a black sclera with a white pupil, which is what she looks like when in battle and what she looked like when Heather and JMH first met her.
And for those of you reaching for your dictionaries, the sclera is the white part of your eye. The only reason I know that is because of video game character creation screens. Next to say goodbye are our friend, secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski, aka the giant orange-furred Sasquatch, and his girlfriend, the flying speedster Aurora, aka Jean-Marie Bobier, but not in the way the others use their AKAs. Aurora gives Heather a tearful hug. Walt looks at Heather awkwardly, and they walk away, with Aurora leaning on Walt. She looks like she's kind of collapsed in tears against him, and she's just the most dramatic theater kid you've ever met. But here it isn't played for superhero soap opera drama. It seems like an authentic reaction that Aurora would have. If you recall, JMH is the one who found Aurora, the superpowered personality that inhabits her body, and freed her from the prison that Jean-Marie kept them trapped in. So losing him was the closest thing she's probably ever had to a dad, and she's known him for probably 2 years.
Heather next makes eye contact with Aurora's twin, flying speedster Northstar, aka Jean-Paul Bobier, several paces away. As she reaches out to him, he jerks away and speeds off into the sky. It looks like the others are trying to give Heather comfort because they could tell she needs it. Here, though, Heather seems to reach out to Northstar for the same reason. His reaction is really hard to read, mostly because Northstar just has that resting asshole face, so you can't really tell if he is angry that JMH is dead. Is he angry for her thinking that he needs some sort of succor? Like it's just.
Is he angry about Aurora leaning on Sasquatch instead of him?
Is he just angry and human connection is a thing that he doesn't desire at this moment, or it's
something he doesn't know how to do, which we've learned. And it shows his discomfort with people showing their feelings in this way, and he doesn't even like these people this much. He's just here for his sister. Last but not least, there's Puck, the acrobatic dwarf named Eugene Judd. A tearful Heather takes a knee, and Puck gives her a tender kiss on her forehead before departing. Now alone, Heather sinks to the ground and rests her head and arms on JMH's grave marker, which is an enormous flat stone that covers the whole gravesite instead of sticking up from the ground. Like, this thing has got to be 8 foot by 4 foot. It's the size of a sheet of plywood, but it's 6 inches of granite.
She does not appear to be wailing or succumbing to grief. She just looks empty, tired. It looks very much like someone who has gotten through the hardest thing she'll ever do and is now taking stock of her emptiness.
In these 6 pages, John Byrne had told us the essential bits of every Alphan's personality without ever saying a word. But Heather is not alone. A shadowed figure in a cowboy hat lurks under a nearby tree. As the stranger lights a cigarette, we find out it is in fact Wolverine, aka Logan, former dear friend of both JMH and Heather from Alpha Flight's earliest days. As he approaches Heather for a private moment, she's startled from her thoughts as the grave marker cracks apart and out climbs the flaming, skinless corpse of her husband. Heather runs away as Wolverine runs in to defend her, claws at the ready, and the corpse grabs Wolverine's face and burns him away to nothing. Heather, still running, trips and her glasses shatter on some rocks, and just as she's climbing the cemetery fence to escape, the corpse reaches her, puts his hands on each side of her face, and pulls her in to kiss its lipless, burning skull.
Which is when Heather jerks awake in her bed, yelling, "No!" Shaman rushes in from the adjoining motel room to comfort her. She says, "Mac, where's Mac? I have to find him." Shaman replies, "Mac is gone, Heather. You must accept that. Mac is gone. Let his spirit rest in peace."
What an insane nightmare. It was this beauty. Like, I thought that we were in the actual memorial service and we were getting this really touching thing. And it turned out to be something else. It was a great, like you said earlier, bait and switch on how the cover was used. This is 13 or 12 pages with the cover, so it's half the issue. It's great. It's a great use of pages.
Well, it does such an amazing job of emphasizing the grief involved and how damaging and shattering an experience like that could be. I mean, it's one thing to lose someone. It's something else entirely to watch them die that horrifically in front of you, up against all the other changes going on, and changes going on in their life. Like, being a part of Alpha Flight has been nothing but one upheaval after another, and for it to seemingly come to a close like that has to be just...
Heather has nothing left in her life. She doesn't have her job. She doesn't have the only home she's known. She doesn't have her parents weren't thrilled about her marrying JMH, which we'll talk about when we get to those issues. So this is it. Like, she's on her own. She's got her Alpha Flight people that she knows. Fortunately, she's known Shaman forever, and so that's a good stable influence for her. But it really emphasizes how at loose ends Heather is, that she's not okay.
Well, and it's also, and we'll get into this more further into this episode, but it's also an open question as to, like, what is Alpha Flight at this point? I mean, the connecting tissue of Alpha Flight was Guardian, was JMH. So if he's gone, and in some ways, if you view that mission as the failure it was because they lost their team leader, I mean, is there still an Alpha Flight at this point? And that's clearly what this issue is setting up, like posing that question, so such that they can establish a new status quo moving forward.
We should remind the listeners, at the end of the last episode, we didn't want to break up the somber tone, but since there was a death, take a drink.
And since we just referenced failure, and in the dream sequence, there's at least one death, take two more.
I'm doing the math. Are there any more? No, I think we're all caught up, listeners. Good job, everybody. Drink responsibly. The other point I wanted to make before we move on from this was, remember when we met Cyclops at the Calgary Stampede? Calgary Stampede, and we said, I really hope that boy talks about his grief and loss, because they were just coming back from the Dark Phoenix saga. Cyclops seeing Jean sacrifice herself on the moon as part of the Phoenix saga is probably roughly comparable to Heather seeing Mac die in front of him. And I hadn't really thought about these parallels in story construction before. And of the two of them, Heather really comes through this much better than Scott does.
Scotty is not okay.
Scotty doesn't know how to make an appointment with a licensed therapist.
I mean, to be fair,
he's just been relying on Professor Xavier giving him mental, like, psionic dopamine bursts to keep him from falling apart, because Xavier needed his child soldier commander.
Shaman and Heather, along with Puck, are in a motel near Parliament Hill in Ottawa, Ontario, in order to meet with unofficial Alpha Flight liaison Gary Cody and inform him of JMH's death. This is taking place 1 month after the events of Alpha Flight number 12, so we're moving in real time, which is always kind of cool. Shaman and Puck hint that there has been no funeral for Guardian, hence Heather's nightmare.
To be fair, there wasn't more than a dustpan's worth of ash to bury of him anyway. And they didn't even scatter his ashes in the Hudson Bay like they did Donnie in the Big Lebowski, but in the Pacific Ocean, because James McDonald Hudson was named Hudson by Byrne for the Hudson Bay.
Random aside, but have you ever heard of the Hudson Bay Company?
I cannot say that I have, Tom.
Well, it has been around since 1670. It was the monopoly on fur trading coming out of North America. It still exists to this day. It owns like Saks Fifth Avenue, Lord & Taylor when that still existed. It's buying Neiman Marcus. It's this massive corporation.
Like the East India Tea Company, except it's still here?
At one time, they did in fact issue their own paper money. Yes.
Huh. The things you have to know to do a podcast about Alpha Flight.
Hey. We're in the rankings. We score in the rankings for arts podcasts in Canada. We got to lean harder into it, buddy.
No, I think that the Canadian arts podcasting community needs to up their game if we're showing up on the rankings.
Two things can be true at once, all right?
All right, we'll just have to work a little harder to stay ahead of them, because it takes a little more to make a champion, Tom. As they're talking, Puck also questions why Shaman shrunk down Omega Flight leader Smart Alec to the size of a G.I. Joe instead of, killing him, since he helped murder JMH.
It is interesting that both Puck and Heather make a point of saying that Mac was murdered. Not dead, not died, murdered. I mean, kind of like the battle damaged Guardian in the last issue, a realistic stakes in response to superhero violence is on full display here.
I had a battle damage He-Man when I was a kid. He had a rotating thing in his chest, and when you hit him, it would rotate and show damage on the chest piece. Yeah, good times.
I'm just thinking back to all the toys when we were kids that like battle damage was such a neat idea and how it would change and all these things. And now my kids just ask me for Fortnite skins and,
Well, we'll be talking more about toys later.
On the topic of small toys that don't move and could probably show some battle damage if they wanted to, Shaman isn't just keeping Smart Alec. I mean, he's kind of keeping him for safekeeping. Shaman states that Smart Alec's mind is lost in the universe beyond the medicine bag, which is kind of neat. So the bag of holding is also, just a universe unto itself. But Shaman has also appealed to the Great Spirit that Smart Alec should be punished. So it's not totally clear to me why Shaman's holding on to him. I mean, I guess he feels some responsibility for the mind being lost, but at the same time, the dude was trying to kill them and did successfully kill his friend. So yeah, I mean, they could totally just murk him, but for whatever reasons, Shaman is not.
I'm going to put a pin in this. He has him because, just remember, Shaman is carrying around a mindless body in his purse. Which brings us to the meeting with Gary Cody, where Heather informs Canada that Guardian is dead. This scene takes place just days after Prime Minister Joseph Philippe Pierre Yves Elliott Trudeau, father of Justin, resigned from the office of Prime Minister. And since Cody was already on the outs inside the government on account of Alpha Flight being shut down, he's gold-bricking his way through until someone officially fires him.
Since his office was eliminated, he's sitting in the Prime Minister's office because, well, no one else is using it. I guess shoot your shot, King. That's a really wild approach.
I've sat in the official state capitol office chair of every constitutional officer in Illinois government because when you get the chance.
It's a very weird flex, bro.
The only ones I got, buddy. Notifying anyone when someone dies is unusual for superhero comics. When an X-Man dies, they just bury them in the side yard with the others and never tell anyone. It's nice to see, again, some realistic approaches to what superhero life entails.
Or the members of Alpha Flight are so green to this, they don't understand that you just buried them in the side yard because Cyclops 2, Electric Boogaloo, is just going to come along at any given moment. You might need that body for a resurrection. It might just sort of show up. Like, don't waste your time being all torn up. Like, they're coming back. They're already here probably. So when Heather asks what Canada will do for a man who gave them 10 years of his life, Cody says 2 things: Jack and shit. Which, again, maybe Gary Cody is just more familiar with the superhero life and is like, why would we do anything? He's just going to pop back.
It's not the superhero life. He's familiar with the bureaucracy of the government, and he knows the government isn't going to be paying out money to this guy who died in America in a personal vendetta mission just because he had worked for us on doing some really messed up stuff for a while, because the guy's already dead. Everything he knows is gone now, so we have no worry about this anymore. Even if I liked the guy, which I did, I can't do anything for you because the people who control the money aren't going to give you any of that money. And that's essentially what Gary Cody says is, look, our hands are tied.
This is the moment where I would normally suggest that this version of Canada is dystopian and terrifying, but nah, man, that's just government. That's just about
everything about this absolutely scans.
Later on in a diner, Michael asks about Heather's finances and the life insurance policy on JMH. She sensibly points out that without a body or murder charges filed, Mac is just a missing person and won't be legally dead for 7 years. She also mentions that the apartment in Brooklyn that they were renting, she'd paid for 4 months up front in cash, but failed to get a receipt. So the landlord has since re-leased it out to someone else. She's already left the home on Laurier Drive. Now she doesn't even have a place in Brooklyn to hang out with. I wonder what her good neighbor, Captain America, would think about a scummy landlord pulling this sort of thing.
Oh my God, Captain America's landlord stealing a widow's money and kicking her out as she's at her lowest. He would barge in and punch that guy right in the face. Also, it's interesting that they referred to him specifically as having been murdered, and yet none of Alpha Flight stuck around to grab an NYC cop and say, "Hey, this bunch of people like just killed our friends. Can you arrest them and put them in jail?" Like Shaman didn't teleport everybody away and take them to Canada to take them.
I mean, do we know that for sure at this point? We're just kind of seeing the aftermath, so we don't necessarily know where Diamond Lil or Wild Child or any of them are at this juncture.
Well, what I'm saying is if they had apprehended these people, they would have been able to file murder charges, which would have solved Heather's life insurance problem. Because right now, the only people who know that James McDonald Hudson is dead are the members of Alpha Flight and Gary Cody. Nobody else.
In a fitting tribute to JMH, no one really figured out the logistics of how to properly take care of this situation when the shit properly hit the fan.
Well, I guess this is the first time a Canadian superhero has died, so they have to come up with the manual, on the fly of being like, "Oh, hadn't thought of that, eh?"
I'm so glad you threw the A in on that one. The scene ends with Heather declaring, "I know what Mac would want. I'm not going to let him down no matter what happens. Heather and McNeil Hudson is not beaten yet."
So it looks like Heather is coming into a larger role in our Alpha Flight family, which is going to be interesting to see how this gets developed. She will be the most consistent member of the team in every single issue of Alpha Flight through the rest of Volume 1. Everyone else will step away for some point in time or another or die or whatever. Heather will be the unifying piece of Alpha Flight moving forward. One thing this issue reminded me of was a gimmick that Marvel did in late December of 2000, early 2001, where they had what was called Nuff Said Month, which was a line-wide, just one issue gimmick where there were no words in the entire issue. If I remember, there was a Deadpool one where he was fighting Dr. Bong and he lost his hearing. And so the whole thing was from Deadpool's perspective where he couldn't hear what anybody was saying, which was funny. The idea came from a 1984 Larry Hama written G.I. Joe comic book, number 21, in case you care, where they had an entirely silent issue, and nobody had ever seen anything like that. That issue also introduced fan favorite Bad Ninja Storm Shadow. So that's where Storm Shadow comes from. Speaking of toys, if you guys don't know, G.I. Joe licensed out their characters to Marvel Comics in order to help create better stories, and Larry Hama picked up G.I. Joe and just created what you know about G.I. Joe. He did a great job making toys fun.
I kind of remember Enough Said Month. I think there was a Thor issue that was actually pretty good. I think it was him like taking over the throne, or one of the times he took over the throne of Asgard, and Heavy wears the crown and all that. But it was visually, it was well done overall. I thought that was when we were in college, and I'm pretty sure that was when you could read Marvel Comics online. It had that little pop-out function that like it would pop out the panels you were supposed to read. And then so you could see the page behind, but it wasn't like a zoom in or anything. It would pop and move along, it was interesting. I think that required like Adobe Flash to work properly.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think, this was in the glory days of Flash web pages and those basic animated functions. Oh yeah, I had forgotten. Yeah, I read all the Ultimate comics that they would release every week. Oh yeah, it was destination.
Sometimes it worked really well. Oftentimes it felt a little clunky, and if your Flash player was even like a half second out of date, it would not work. Jesus Christ, we're old.
Ready for the urn, bro.
I mean, JMH isn't. There wasn't enough even for an urn.
Well, speaking of, we've been calling him JMH in every episode of this podcast, and yet suddenly everyone in this issue is calling him Mac. Did you notice that?
Like, I mean, Heather always called him Mac.
Well, I only recall her referring to him as Mac like maybe once or twice. It was when Wolverine showed up in their apartment, and she said, "Wolvie, are you here to fight Mac again?" That was, I think, the first time I recall it being Mac.
I get the feeling it might have been a bit of a pet name or just like his nickname with her, keeping in mind that her maiden name was McNeil. So she might have found something kind of funny about that, just how couples do.
Mick and Mac. I could totally see Heather making a big point of the difference between the Mick and the Mac. Maybe he called her Mick.
Which is a hate crime.
That is so funny that Mick is a hate crime, but Mac is an affectionate nickname.
I guess my other point though would be most of the time they would refer to each other by their code names. So in personal life and private life, as much as they had that, Mac might have just been how people who were his friends who knew him referred to him.
Well, I do notice that it kind of starts with Shaman here, and I think Gary Cody calls him Mac as well. And in Shaman and Gary Cody probably are both age appropriate peers for JMH, and would have known him long enough and worked closely with him enough that maybe that would wear off. Maybe it's just, his private nickname. Anyway, so apparently we're calling him Mac now. So we're going to retire our JMH for now because we have a new shorthand for Mac that everybody else is going to use.
Just in time for him to die.
Well, yeah, yeah. Also, the diner that the conversation that Heather, Puck, and Shaman are having, the diner is named JoJo's, and it has a big sign that says JoJo's and has a big clown face next to it. It is supremely jarring to see Michael fucking Two Youngman in this crass McDonald's knockoff. It's like seeing Doctor Strange in a Golden Corral. That's what this
I'm just
was.
going to say that clearly you've not spent enough time in Canada and the local franchises up there, because this does not shock me one bit.
I do wish they had poutine on the table. That would have been nice.
They did. Puck already ate it.
Another minor point, I noticed that Puck, his mustache has connected to his beard. It's no longer disconnected.
It's because he's so tore up. He didn't have time to clean it up and get it the way he wanted it to be. I'm just gonna keep throwing out random stuff to counter your points, my man.
He was really angling to be the diminutive hirsute fighter Canadian in Heather and Max thruple, and now his dream is dashed. He's letting himself go, letting his mustache grow in.
Jackson took so much from so many on that day.
Well, the issue proper closes with some overwrought narration that introduces us to Jacob Vandernet, a young man running for his life along the docks of Ottawa, only to be dragged under the water by some unseen menace. So it looks like our next arc is taking Canada's premier superhero team to Ottawa. And whenever we see water in Canada, you know what that means. The return of Marina.
Yay.
Eventually, but we'll get there.
And speaking of Marina, our next issues feature her and several other Alphans in a guest appearance in ROM Space Knight. Chris, what is a ROM? Should I care? And please tell me this is a Warhammer 40k thing. It's really, really popular with the algorithm right now, and I'm happy to throw a few skulls to the Skull Throne.
No can do, buddy. So ROM is traditionally spelled capital R, capital O, capital M. So I'm thinking that maybe we ought to say it always just like you did as ROM.
I think that's the only way to do it.
Like the sound from Star Trek the Motion Picture when V'ger shows up, that big ROM. Well, ROM Space Knight is a toy designed in 1978 and sold to the Parker Brothers Company, known for board games and not early electronic toys. Not knowing what in hell to do with their toy, PB Co. licensed the rights to Marvel Comics, and from December 1979 to February 1986, a monthly comic book was published that gave ROM not just a name, but a backstory, support cast, enemies, and a love interest. And every one of those issues was written by friend of the pod, the one, the only, Mr. Bill
I'm going to
Mantlo.
need you to say that again and say it the right way.
Okay, all right. And every one of those issues was written by friend of the pod, the one, the only, Mr. Bill Mantlo!
We will be referring to the comics from here on out, but you should know that this was definitely a toy before it was a story. Rom looks like a 7-foot silver robot, but he's technically a cyborg from the planet Galador, where the people look just like us humans. Like Zen La, where the Silver Surfer comes from.
His face is very simply designed with an Optimus Prime flat mouthpiece, but also the parts above his eyes are also flat. It's a very simple design. In fact, the artist who worked on the comic book, Sal Buscema, said that he really liked working on this book because it was so easy to draw.
It really does look like it almost looks like a draft version. That's good enough. Let's move on with our day.
But the crowd scenes are fantastic, like the open up. Okay, we'll get there. But anyway, so he's got this flat face and he has a recessed oval around where his eyes should be, which shine, and his eyes shine like red lights in unpredictable ways, and they make him look very mysterious. And the eyes are the coolest part about Rom. Like, I've even made a face patch of Rom specifically because I thought that the eyes would look really cool in thread. And without the eyes, I don't think Rom would work as well as he does. It's a compelling look.
But is it compelling? Does he work well?
Look, I'm saying what he's got going on is more because he's got these eyes. It's not that what the eyes don't make him awesome, but the only bits of anything that are cool come from the eyes. Let's not oversell it. Fun fact, though, those eyes are red instead of the original planned green because the green LEDs in 1978 were much more expensive than the red.
His girlfriend is a space knight named Starshine, who only recently bonded with the Space Knight armor. She is a human named Brandy from West Virginia, where Rom first arrived on Earth. Rom is hunting the evil dire wraiths who want to corrupt our world with their ill-defined alien sorcery and take it for themselves. This leads Rom to skip across the 616 and enlist the aid of virtually every active character in Marvel at the time. His licensing and publishing history is a mess.
Rom is eligible for a future Why Not season because this is the kind of goofy stuff I would love to talk about. So let us know if you're interested,
please,
listeners.
for the love of God, don't be interested, because if I have to keep saying Rom for multiple episodes, I will lose my mind.
You know, I was just thinking that if we had to spend 72 issues or something saying Rom, it would either be hilarious or we would be insane.
There's a good chance that it'll be both, but...
the things we endure. That brings us to ROM number 56, written by Bill Mantlo, art by Mark Bright.
Say it right or pay the price.
Oh, Jesus Christ. All right. That brings us to ROM number 56, written by Bill Mantlo, art by Mark Bright, inks by Mel Candido, letters by Janice Chiang, and not to take a dig at Janice, but I thought the inks were done by Mel Canoido when I first read it. Colors by Sean Bean. Edited by Ralph Macchio. Yes, the one you're thinking of, not that 80s movie star. And Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief.
Which Ralph Macchio could you possibly be referring to other than the 80s? And hey, don't sell the man short. He's having one hell of a career renaissance.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, if you're listening to this podcast and you hear the name Ralph Macchio, you're probably thinking of Marvel Comics editor from the 80s, Ralph Macchio.
Let us know if you agree with that statement. I think that is a profound misunderstanding of what's going on here.
Listeners, I need you to do me a solid and vindicate me on this one. So show up, turn out, fam.
ROM 56 was published after Alpha Flight 12, but appears to take place before Alpha Flight 12. There's a line in, and I'm just going to do R56 from here, R56, where Michael Two Young Men says someone contacted Vindicator to have them investigate. So this was possibly a long time ago. Since Marina has been off with Namor since Alpha Flight number 4, this probably takes place between Alpha Flight number 1 and number 2. No idea why this would be published after Alpha Flight number 12. It's been almost a year timeline-wise since this story would have taken place, so it's a little awkward.
The events of this issue took place. Let's put it that way. Yeah. We have Marina and Snowbird on the cover. Marina is being threatened by a pair of monster hands rising from the water behind her, and Snowbird is flying towards her. It's fine. Has the Alpha Flight logo. That's nice.
In this section, we're chatting about ROM 56 and 57. It's a 2-issue story. In ROM 58, Alpha Flight does have like a 1-page, 2-page appearance, kind of wrapping up their part of the tale.
I actually read the issue. They handed off.
I read the issue too, and
like, it's not
Ant-Man handoff is bizarre. Look. Larry Hama might have done an amazing job of creating the G.I. Joe lore like you were describing earlier. I don't doubt that one bit. This is the most ham-handed. Let's jam in every character that anyone might ever have cared about just to make them pay attention to ROM and maybe buy his, knock-off LED lighted ass. Vindicator sends Shaman, Sasquatch, Snowbird, and Marina to the coal mining town of Beaver Dam in Beaver Kill Valley in northern Ontario. And I don't think either one of us did any research to see if the place is real, and I don't care. A, we've done enough of this to know entirely possible that's the name of a place in Canada.
Oh, no, Byrne's not writing. This is Mantlo, not Byrne.
B, I want it to be true. I want there to be a coal mining town called Beaver Dam in Beaver Kill Valley in northern Ontario. He's searching now.
Beaver Kill Valley, Marvel Database Phantom, Beaver Valley, Ontario. Oh, I think that's what it is. There's a Beaver Valley, and now we just call it Beaver Kill Valley. So half a point. Half a point, Mantlo. Some lovely narration sets the scene for us. Here is the tiny town of Beaver Falls. While never truly prosperous, it was once much more than it is now. In a day when coal was in great demand and the Beaver Lake Mining Company ripped the ebony ore from the valley's hills. Now, Beaver Falls is a prime importer of public assistance, a prime exporter of unemployment. Now, this was, end quote, clearly. Now, this was 40 years ago, but I am intimately familiar with such towns like this around me here in southern Illinois. By no means all, but the coal based areas are not okay and haven't been for some time.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. The mining company, abbreviated BLMC, is located above the town, down the valley, but was abandoned by the company years ago. The river that flows through the valley has been dammed up in front of the mine to create a lake, into which coal slurry has been seeping, rendering it incredibly polluted and black to our eyes.
You know, the details of the story, we're a guest appearance in ROM here. The dam is going to break. There's dire wraiths involved. Alpha Flight is utterly incidental to the plot, as with everything involving ROM. So we're going to kind of gloss over this a little bit and just give you the high points. So the dire wraiths are in the mine because they seek out underground areas to work their sorcery. So they mutate some fish to attack the town, distract the heroes. The heroes deal with the fish. Eventually, they try to get to the dire wraiths, but they can't get there in time. Dam breaks. The town gets utterly washed away, and the heroes do their absolute best to save everyone they can. But all in all, it's a failure. So, take a drink.
It does do an effective job of expressing that failure and, frankly, the horror of a dam breaking and just wiping out a town. You know, we see a father get his kids up onto the top of the roof of the house, and then his hand is the last thing they see as he goes underneath. Snowbird is flying overhead trying to grab people, and she sees some folks on a makeshift raft, and then a wave comes and washes them away. It really gets across the failure and the scale of this, and has an interesting environmental thing going on in it too. Yeah, it is a throwaway story for what seems to be a really freaking weird comic, but I don't know. There's some interesting stuff happening here. Not so interesting as we need to give you our usual blow by blow, and not so interesting as to require you to seek it out, I don't think. But it's kind of neat. I mean, it's not just a, hey, Rom is hanging out with Shaman. You know, there's a little bit more to it than that.
It was not as utterly baffling as Mantlo's Incredible Hulks that we've covered before. This at least made sense. I found that in like a reverse Machine Man, where in Machine Man, I liked Machine Man and his supporting staff and everything that was going on just sucked and were boring. In this, Rom is just there and doesn't do anything for me. But his cast and the stuff that's going on around him is really cool. Like he's teamed up with perpetual sidekick in the Marvel Universe, Rick Jones. Just before this, apparently, the dire wraiths had attacked like the shield helicarrier, and the humans became aware of the dire wraiths. So now there's this international military cooperative that's working together. So presumably that's how they came to ask Vindicator to do this, because somebody within the Canadian military said, "Oh yeah, we've got people to do this sort of stuff. Let me talk to them." And the Rick Jones stuff and the keeping it secret from the public, all that stuff was really cool and compelling. And Rom just sucks. It's like you're playing Clear Bells and then you hit a steel bar, you know? It's just this clanking noise of nothing to it. I don't know, it's weird.
There's a real dead fish element to Rom in the midst of all this. And I mean, it's interesting. Like once the dam breaks, all the superheroes try and do something to stop it. You know, Rom and Starshine try and blast it with lasers, which, you know, obviously does nothing.
The lasers, they do nothing.
Sasquatch starts ripping up trees and trying to build like a new dam.
No, they
Shot.
were pre-cut logs. They
Oh,
were
that's right.
already
That's right.
cut timber on a truck, and I was like, "Oh, that's very convenient." But yeah, he just starts picking them up and jamming them in the ground like toothpicks, trying to make a barricade.
Shaman uses his magic to try and like grow a wall of thorns of a hedge, and none of it works because you're talking about a massive dam and that flood of water.
Well,
But
no, it does work to some extent. Even Marina is making water spouts and trying to use her power to help push the water back to give the people more time to get away. And they each deploy whatever they can to try to slow this down to give people time.
I guess what I'm trying to get across is yes, everything they do provides a little bit of a delaying action that allows the maximum number of people to survive that can survive. But this is not a they swoop in and completely save the day. It's trying their best to hold back something that they can't possibly hold back, and that's just I don't know that is also an interesting character beat, plot beat thrown into a story about ROM. Like that's the jarring part of it, I think.
Now, I want to circle back to this failure, essentially, is what we're going to be calling it. But remember that the water that's inundating this town is the polluted water from the mining company that has since been mixed with the sorcery of the dire wraiths. So it's like real evil black water. And so when Marina is swimming through it, because they're trying to figure out what's going on with the water, you got to have Marina. um they say it's like swimming through tar, and it makes her sick, and so she gets overcome and succumbs to the pollution that's going on in the water. And at the very end, when Shaman revives her, she comes to and she says, uh, is it over? Did we save the town? And one of the townspeople says, save the town? Is that what you heroes were here to do? What happened then? Why didn't you do something? And the art just looks around at the wrecked town and everything underwater and ruined. And Rom says, why didn't we do something? Gods of Galador, we did. And that's how the issue ends. Surprisingly impactful. He's like, yeah, you're all still alive to be here. Otherwise, I mean, we can put you back in the water. Would you like that?
There are a lot of comments to be made here about the failed town and choices and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
But
yeah, but that's what happens when you pollute your environment, Canada. Do you want dire wraiths? This is how you get dire wraiths.
so before we move off of ROM, Bill Mantlo, was this a little bit of a trial balloon to see how old Bill might handle some Alpha Flight folks? Do you think?
It seems like he and John Byrne were at least passing friends. They were famously, when Mantlo takes over Alpha Flight, is when John Byrne is taking over the Incredible Hulk from Mantlo, and people were very excited about what Byrne was going to do on there, and he bailed like very quickly to go over and do the Superman reboot. One thing that really struck me as I read these was, now these are 80s comic books. They are a standard 24 pages of content plus the cover. And in Mantlo's, at least these two issues, those are divided strictly into 3 acts of 8 pages each. And as I was reading it again to get ready for this, I would flip through from page 1 to page 9 to page 17. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. There is a very clear movement from what we were doing to what we're doing now in each one of these. And I could feel how Mantlo was streamlining his process, I guess. Like, you can tell that he's a guy who knows how to pay his bills by writing comic books. And that's not a complaint. And I felt like in this story, because we're not dealing with weird alien. I mean, we are. I mean, Rom's an alien. Rom is an alien, and the dire wraiths are aliens. But like, we're connected to a human town on Earth. There's Earth pollution involved, even if we have, the plot necessity of the dire wraiths making it magic pollution. And I enjoyed this Bill Mantlo more than I expected to. I feel like the early goofiness of those Hulk issues really soured my impression on him. However, I also know what he's going to do to some of my favorite characters, and his sins are not absolved, but I will somewhat soften my critique on Bill Mantlo for now and the next 3 minutes. Deal?
Deal. So having wrapped up Alpha Flight's adventure with ROM, we're going to move on to a few letters. And gotta say, very excited. We're getting some feedback and some letters from folks. Our inbox is open. Love to hear from everyone.
Yeah, and where can they do that, Tom?
At the whynotpod.com.
And if you want to send us an email directly, it's whynotehpod@gmail.com. Why not a pod? You get the joke, everybody?
He's saying it like that because I'm the one that set it up, because that was the only Why Not Pod version I could find on Gmail. And yeah, the A makes me laugh, Chris, every single time I look at it. Unbelievable. You can also reach out to us across all of our various socials. So please do. We'd love to hear from folks. Kicking us off, we have Justin. I'm only on episode 3 of the lead-in, and I'm enjoying it quite a bit. And the base idea of your podcast is good to see some positivity. Editorializing. This is where the positivity ends. But I just gotta straighten something out. Is Langkowski. Unless someone at some point said he doesn't pronounce the first K, it kind of pings the back of my brain when you say Langowski. Reddit user 6 Ministries so far also points this out.
You know, Justin, I'm not sure how that happened, but I take responsibility. At some point, I must have typed our friend secret agent linebacker superhero Dr. Walter's name wrong, and AutoCarrot just kept it like that. But, for the record, I did notice this spelling error happen in an issue of Alpha Flight Volume 2, and it included the proper spelling earlier in the issue, so we are no less consistent than Marvel on the name of our friend, Dr. Walt.
And you know, I'm not entirely sure we are totally screwing up the pronunciation. Maybe with a Canadian accent, that first K would be a hard accent, Langowski. But I don't know. My slight Chicago accent making it silent makes sense to me. And maybe that's a justification. I don't know. But I don't know. Langkowski just doesn't quite roll for me where Langowski does. And plus, you know, screw Walt.
Tom left the K from Langkowski in K-Town over by Midway.
Moving on. Hey, Chris and Tom. I just want to drop you a note to say that I'm really enjoying your podcast and Alpha Flight, my first comics love. The two of you have great energy, and I appreciate your enthusiasm for this awesome series. I'm not sure, since you're both American, if you would know that Snowbird is also clearly based on Canadian singer Anne Murray, whose breakout hit in 1970 was Snowbird. The resemblance is most obvious when you compare a young Anne Murray to Snowbird's alter ego, Anne Mackenzie, as drawn in issue 6. I hope you continue the podcast into the underrated Mantlo run. Controversial opinion, I know. Once you wade through the muck of the tall puck mess he does, a lot of cool shit, and the art gets much better with Dave Ross and Jim Lee. All the best, Sween.
Well, thanks for your thoughts and letting us know that reference. Our buddy G actually dropped the song Snowbird onto the yet-to-be-released Episode 6 playlist, and we really need to get the rest of those up, Tom, before this email came in, so this is a neat bit of serendipity. And I don't think we've mentioned this on the podcast before, but we have been putting together some, we call them EPs, just a short little playlist where we give our friend who loves music some cues about some words about what our episode is about, and he spits back a playlist for us that makes us go, holy shit, how do you do that? And like 10 minutes later, we've got the whole thing up and running, and it's perfect. And when we gave him the Snowbird cue, he came back with the Anne Murray Snowbird song, which is how both of us discovered it just before we got this email from Sween. So yeah, we've all learned something new.
And funnily enough, when this came in, I mentioned it to my wife, who immediately looked at me like I was insane and said, yes, I know that song. It's one of my favorite songs. And I listened to it, and yeah, I've heard that song around before. No idea it was called Snowbird until that moment. But I'm also terrible about names of songs.
Well, if you follow our socials, we'll be putting links to those EPs up as we get them pulled together and with art and all that fun stuff. And you can always find out what's going on with us and our playlists at www.thewhynotpod.com. Feel free to come by and leave us a message just like these others. But we do have one more email that we got. And this was actually, it's very special to us because it was the very first fan email that we got. Matt in California wrote in, just found your pod, and I'm really enjoying it. I hope you guys stick around through the hard times, the John Calamy era, and it will be interesting to see what you thought of the Mantlo days. Though I hear you dropping hints, so I guess I know where that's going to go. Anyway, hope you two stick around and keep going. Best of luck. Let me tell you, Matt, I have burned through Alpha Flight Volumes 1 and 2 in the last 6 months, and any problem that I have with Calamy's coloring book style art is far eclipsed by my problems with James Hudnall's writing during the same era. The body count is high enough that we will have to suspend our take a drink policy. I think that one issue gets over 300 deaths, and many of them are gruesomely on page. So I think that Calamy does a good job of telling the story. As far as art styles go, it's it's okay. It's the 90s, you know. What do you want from mid late 90s? It's the best you're going to get. And one note on reading ahead, I haven't read volume 2 since I was buying it monthly, and revisiting it after I started this podcast, I am shocked at how much I liked it. So my contrarian hill is apparently going to be Alpha Flight volume 2. Not as bad as you remembered it. You were just growing out of comics anyway. Thanks for taking the time to contact us, everybody, and once again, we'd love to hear more. That brings us to this episode's featured patch from the Excelsior Embroidery Company, a ROM face patch, complete with cool red laser light thingies. Check out excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com for all your embroidered comic nerd needs like patches, towels, battle vests, and anything else soft enough to hoop. And visit the whynotpod.com blog to see it and find out links to all things Why Not around the web. Leave a comment on the blog. We'd love to try to answer your Alpha Flight questions.
This episode of Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis, with cat noises provided by a chonk named Teeny. It is produced by Tom Flynn with help from Chris Baker. New episodes are available every other week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and your preferred podcatcher. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us on your podcast provider. Those are really important to helping fellow fans find our show.
Thanks, everybody. And we'll see you next time when we tackle a 3-issue Alpha Flight arc about what lurks in Lake Ontario.